Hello and welcome back to The Motivating Force. Joining me as always, we have host Wade, an aspiring Marine Corps officer who's currently finishing up ROTC and his bachelor's degree in the criminal justice field. And myself, Justin, a motivational speaker who's always more than excited to share all of our wonderful ideas and topics with you guys. Today we're going to be kind of taking an abstract approach about how you easily lie to yourselves about all kinds of things in life. And all this talk today is going to stem from one little idea here, or one little, I guess you call it a mechanism of the human brain, and that is your perception of things. Okay? So your perception is the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information in order to represent and understand the presented information and environment. The whole point of it, though, and what you can kind of really even pull out from the definition of perception is it's your brain trying to figure out how everything makes sense.
Right, and that's why everybody contradicts themselves when it comes to context and taking so many things out of context, because every person has a different perspective.
And that perspective, and as far as your ability to perceive things goes, your brain is always going to be in a state where it's always going to kind of think it's right when it comes to your perception, just because it needs everything to make sense. It needs reality to be real. So when you fill in all these spaces, and it will subconsciously fill in spaces that you don't know exist, which we are going to be talking about later. But the first step here, I want to talk about a little experiment to kind of, get our feet wet with this idea here and how easily it is that you lie to yourself with or without knowing about it. So this experiment was done by Wayne Whiten, and he did a experiment on some children.
Okay, that's always fun.
And this was actually done in the early 90s.
All right.
So there was no
media pushback, basically.
Yeah, morals were not in question,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Well, less of these experiments were on the media is what I'm saying.
In this experiment, students were allocated to pleasant and unpleasant tasks by a computer. So they were told that either a number or a letter would flash on the screen, and that was going to be associated with the task that they had to do.
Yeah, and mind you, a computer in the 90s is already an unpleasant task.
And okay, so what the tasks were, they had a drink in front of them, and it was pretty much going to be you're either going to drink orange juice or you were going to have this really unpleasant tasting healthy drink, right? So I'm assuming they put V8 in front of the kids. I don't know. So they had the drinks there, and the numbers were kind of, okay, this is going to be either the unpleasant task or the pleasant task, but it's already kind of predetermined, right? You're not picking a glass based off the number. You just have the one in front of you. So the number or letter would flash on the screen real fast, and then they would take a sip of the drink. They used an ambiguous figure that looked like the letter B, and it also looked like the number 13.
Right.
When the letters were associated with the pleasant tasks, so the kids who got to drink the orange juice, more kids said that they saw the letter B.
Okay.
And when they had the kids who had to drink the unpleasant tasting health drink, more of them tended to perceive that it was the number 13.
Right.
So because we all know the associations there, right?
You're associating that the 13 is bad because it's an unlucky number.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then when they're tasting something unhealthy or unpleasant, I've said unhealthy. When they're tasting something unpleasant, they're going through that in a negative mindset. So then they're quick to tie the negative mindset of the drink to an unlucky number.
Right.
That's the perspective that their brain immediately goes to.
And so there was this whole test on perception. And it's really interesting to see how we'll fill in the blank spaces with things that kind of already make sense. We get so used to these patterns, and we get really good at recognizing and setting these trends for ourselves. And we build up natural triggers, which is, of course, something we talked about when we had our episode on breaking habits. So changing up the environment, even in the slightest way, can disrupt our daily routines. But instead of trying to eliminate these habits or whatnot, it's not what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about pushing past those triggers, getting past those perceptions, and realizing that our brain might automatically be lying to us sometimes.
Yeah. I think this is actually a great episode to go hand in hand with last week's when we talked about the respecting the now, the power of being present, because I think a lot of that has to do with your subconscious is immediately processing that perspective change. And I think one of the biggest things that people can do is if they are focused or giving more focus to the now and being present, they can fully encompass both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because, if you're tied up with things in the past, you're tied up about things in the future. And when you do throw off your judgment like that, you're giving your perception, I guess, like more power.
Yeah.
Over filling in the gaps because your mind's already kind of busy with other things.
Exactly.
So you're kind of going through your daily life and your brain is just going to automatically fill in everything else.
Yeah, like the example with the experiment. If the kids, I mean, I'm sure they're just kids, so it's like they're just focused on how bad the drink tasted and they look at the screen and they're like, okay, 13, whatever. But if they gave it more thought to just sit back and go, okay, let me push past the unpleasant drink that I just had and then focus more on like, let me really look at this, then their perspective would change. Right. Even if they first see the 13, then they really look at it and go, okay, maybe it's letter B.
It's amazing what can happen when you take that minute just to step back and really think about it. And this is why I'm going to use the word trigger. So bear with me because I'm getting into that, okay? Our triggers, of course, are caused by bad and sometimes traumatic events. But we tend to perceive the trigger as part of the bad times to come. It's not necessarily true. The trigger is innocent. So this is why it's so important to recognize your triggers and have a plan of action to correct the situation whenever you think something bad's going to happen, because just by the act of reaching those triggers, getting into that state of mind, nothing bad has happened yet. You're just preparing yourself for it. So when you recognize that about your triggers, you can get that sense of urgency, and like we were saying last week, be a little more present with yourself and really analyze the situation, kind of take control of your perception and of the things you're perceiving and make sure that everything's fine.
Right.
And if it's not, then of course correct it.
Yeah.
So I know like this is great for people who are, in need of therapy. I know they go through a lot of this kind of training as far as triggers go, but it's a lesson that gets overlooked for the average person.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to talk about it, because here's how it relates to you guys. Just because you broke down and you ate some chocolate in the middle of a diet, it doesn't mean you're a loser. It doesn't mean you failed at dieting. And it doesn't mean that the rest of your diet is screwed. And the same goes for when you get really motivated and really hyped up. The first person you run to and you got all these good things to share with them and talk about, and say they're having a bad day or something's going on, and they just immediately shut you down like, bro, that's way too much energy right now. Like,
yeah,
you need to calm down, right? It doesn't mean that you don't deserve to have that hype or have that motivation in your life. Don't take that as the trigger to just go back to the way things were. Or don't take that as the trigger to call yourself a failure. Don't use that as the excuse to not push anymore.
Well, it also goes great with the law of attraction, because speaking of triggers, like if you're somebody who commutes to work, right, and then you're having a good day so far, and then you start getting cut off in traffic, people start like swerving in the lane, you see people on their phones, because that's a trigger for me when I'm sitting at a light and you just see all the people in the car next to me are just on their phone. It's like, okay, yeah, you're at a light, but then when you start driving, they're like 3 seconds behind because they were too busy looking at the phone or something. But having like that trigger at that moment will then, like in your perception, it'll trigger a snowball effect of attracting all this negativity, because one, it's going to put you in a bad mood right there. Even if it's little, it's still a trigger. And then you're going to keep holding on to that in your subconscious. And if you don't have the wherewithal to like think about it in the moment and go, you know what, that's just a trigger, like acknowledge it, and then go, everything's fine. Like, I'm good. I'm focused on the road. Like, yeah, he's an idiot. I'm just going to avoid that. But then continue on with like, I'm going to have a good day. I'm going to do all these things that I've had planned out for myself today, like all these goals that I'm going to achieve. If you don't do that before, the triggers will then just get to you, and then you're going to attract all that negativity throughout the day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think I have to sum up that first point now, because that sums it up pretty well. That's the whole reason we're talking about this, with those triggers, with falling into, the same old trap we fall into day in and day out.
Well, yeah, it's because like triggered is such a like a stigmatic word to say now. But when you first said triggered, I was like, when people are texting and driving, that was the first thing I thought of. So I was like, oh, let me use that.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm sure everybody that's listening to this, they probably have their own thing that they thought of when you said that word.
See, that's exactly the point, because we recognize these trends that we go through day in day, and it's almost like at the red light, instead of just waiting for the light to turn green, you're like, how can I piss myself off? Oh, yeah. I know what really gets me. Hey, how many of these idiots are on their phone?
Yeah, you're looking for it.
And then you're like, yep, that's right. I knew somebody was going to be on their phone. I'm pissed now.
Yeah.
And it's like you do it to yourself.
You summarized my day.
And that's the thing. That's the thing that I'm trying to bring awareness to today is with that perception, with the things you're filling in, you can focus so hard on very specific things and draw those things to you just to prove the point that, the world sucks, or you don't deserve to be happy, or you don't have motivation, whatever it is that allows you to not perform at your optimal level.
Yeah. Well, you're basically giving yourself the distractions to not let yourself get to that point. Because like you said, like the world sucks, or you're hearing all these things in the media, or people always saying like, let's say about what's going on in the world right now, like we need to wear masks again. It's like, fine, that's fine. But if you're constantly hearing that, you're going to keep looking for the ones that aren't wearing masks. And then you're going to go, oh, well, if they're not wearing a mask, I don't need to wear a mask. Or if they're getting vaccinated, I don't need to get vaccinated. Like you start snowballing in that kind of negative effect where you're just focusing so much more of that energy on the negative instead of just focusing on the good, because subconsciously you're hearing all this noise around you, and you're holding that thought process in the back of your mind that you're trying to find the right way to prove that point to yourself. Like even if you don't believe it at first, like, oh, we need to wear masks again. Sure, whatever. Like if I don't believe it and then you start seeing everybody doing it, then you're going to start proving yourself right, or proving that thought right.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect thing there that ties together this first half of perception and what we're talking about when it comes to how you can lie to yourself. Okay. Getting on to the second point now of how easily you lie to yourself. This, of course, still is dealing with perception, but we're going to be focusing more on those lies now. A little story time with it, right? So this is something dumb that I used to do in high school to pass by time in boring classes, right? Of course, I think this was after watching like a Vsauce video, of course. Right? When he had a big thing, he talked about perception and talked about the delay that your brain has with recognizing information, and how it will still fill in the gaps and paint the pictures to kind of not allow reality to break.
Right.
So, because of course, as the signals come in and, you're receiving visual signals, audio cues, things like that, they kind of take a minute before your consciousness picks up on all of it. But your brain still kind of keeps this like this endless stream. You don't have that buffer time for your consciousness, which is great because I think that would be scary as hell. So one of the little stupid things he said you could do, and I did this for 3 years, was if you look at the clock fast enough on the wall, and it has a second hand, right? If you catch it at like just the right millisecond, you'll notice that first second on the hand almost feels like 2 seconds. It almost looks like it's 2 seconds.
Right. It feels like it takes
longer. And then
longer.
it's normal after that, right? So it feels like it takes longer that first time you look at it because your brain already fills in the picture. So that way when you do that and your brain's like, okay, you're stupid, you move too fast, but we can't just make it black, so let's put the last thing we saw up until we can load this new information. Is essentially, I guess, the way he put it, right?
Well, yeah, because it does take a millisecond or two for your eyes to actually adjust and your brain to process what it's seeing.
Yeah. So then it just has that still image of the clock on the wall, and then it's like, okay, now we're starting to perceive the second hand moving, and then you get to see that. Yeah. And when you catch it at the right time, you can notice the second hand takes longer to move. Yeah. And I thought that was like amazing, right? So I did it all the time for years. And again, okay, so how does this relate to you guys? This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying we can kind of automatically lie to ourselves, because we can paint these pictures with using our perception that, our perception works really hard to make sure everything appears normal all the time. anything out of the ordinary for you, anything that doesn't make sense for you, your perception is going to try its best to glaze over it.
Yeah.
You know, especially things that it doesn't think are important, non-obvious things. It's going to glaze right over the top of it, and it's going to work really hard to make sure you don't even realize it. Because again, we're just trying to keep your reality real. So this is what I mean by you can be automatically lying to yourself and not notice it. You know, the faster you're trying to get through the day, the faster you're trying to get your goals accomplished and move and get these things done. Of course, there is that fine line where, you know, it's great being motivated, it's great being hyped up, and it's great having that drive, right? It's great to be efficient and perform as optimally as you can. But at the same time, if you try rushing through things in life, it's going to be a bad time because you're going to miss so much from it. And this isn't talking about missing the sun on your face and the flowers growing in the field, right? This is, no, you're literally going to miss really important details sometimes the faster you try going through things. And your brain is just going to glaze over the top of it all. Your perception is going to just make it seem like it is what it is. And you're not going to get to retain that experience.
I mean, it's all great because, like you're saying, everybody takes things in different perspectives. And I'm just still stuck on like the whole trick that you had with the clock. And it's almost like when you're watching a movie or something and then you hit pause, right? And then when you hit play again, it's not immediate because it needs that little bit of buffer zone. So then you hit play and then it almost looks like it's just a picture of that movie and then it starts playing. But that's what your mind is doing to everything you're taking in on your day-to-day basis. So realizing, like you're saying, it's trying to just glaze over things. It's trying to just get you by so then you can move on to the next thing and immediately jumping to whichever conclusion you already have predetermined in your subconscious. So being conscious of it, being like acknowledging that your brain does that is a big step to overcoming that problem that you're basically setting for yourself of lying to yourself.
When you start seeing those trends and the less you pay attention to it, the more you kind of move yourself one step ahead, two steps ahead. And that might not even be what's actually going on around you. Or it might make you more keen to just accept it as nothing's changing. And then that's totally the wrong way to be looking at things, you know? And we do it all the time. And I think the biggest thing, like the whole reason why this topic came up for me and I want to talk about it, first being not only finding that, you know, little bit of research there by Wayne Whiten, it also just had to do with like the monotony of my day sometimes, right?
Yeah, everybody has those.
And then it's like, you know, I feel like, okay, we can fill up this time right now where I'm like bored out of my mind and I'm doing the same task day in and day out and everything's so monotonous right now. And of course, there's just brief thoughts, right? And it's like, I could be doing something else without even realizing that what I'm currently doing at the time was something productive. But it's a habit. So even though it's not necessarily something like I enjoy doing, it's still something productive and great for my life.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just like good or bad habits. It's still going to take less and less energy to keep your focus on it because the more you do it, the more it's going to become a habit. So then you can drift off into other thoughts, into other like mental focus energy that you can be spending somewhere else.
Yeah, but then also the more boring that task gets.
That's if it's a good or like that's if it's a bad one, right? Because if it's a good one, if it's something you enjoy doing, I mean, I guess you can say it's more
good for you are two different things, right? They can be, right?
Playing video games for 10 hours every day could get boring, even if you do enjoy doing it.
Yeah. In the same way where people who don't like reading, right? If you're starting to read more because you know it's good for you, doesn't necessarily mean you enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know? So that's what I'm talking about, where getting into that mindset of just like monotony. And it's like, man, but what I'm doing right now is great. And it's good for me, it's good for my family, and it's great for the future of my world.
So then you thinking of that, okay, because this one thing has been something that I've been thinking about recently. And do you think that to be human is to find chaos in all aspects, right? So even though you're thinking that way, right? It does seem mundane. Your mind needs the the stimulation of finding some kind of chaos to alter what you're doing to give you some different stimulation of serotonin, of urgency, of like something else is going on while you're already doing this thing that you've been doing every single day. Like, to be human, you need to seek things that are different.
Seeking chaos,
because I'm not saying
debatable.
Yeah, I'm not saying chaos in a bad way. I'm saying chaos is in something that's different than what you're doing now. We can't. I mean, people say that we're creatures of habit, but there's so many different examples of people trying to just like you get bored so easily now. You need to find some kind of chaos to incur, some kind of change to happen for you to be like, okay, I'm good with what's happening. Well, I could get by because it's something new.
I think the difference is we have so much safety and security now compared to before. So say way back in the day, right? And you talk about people who were doing the same thing day in and day out, say like
hunters and
farming, gathering, hunting, building huts, whatever it was, right? All at the same time, you were waiting for the neighboring tribe who's a one-day walk away to come over and kill you. You're waiting for the bears to come out of the woods. You're waiting for all these different chaotic things to happen that backside of your brain that's always like preparing you had a very valid reason to always be loaded and ready to go.
Okay.
And nowadays, not so much, right? Now the back of our brain, as far as like that chaos seeking, like what's going to happen? Why do I need to be in a protective state right now? It's all about the different things. I know we talked about it before where, with like losing a job could feel like, a family member's dying.
Yeah.
Because we don't have that same relation as before with our danger instincts.
Yeah, now the tiger in the bushes is like losing your livelihood. So
I do think there is a big part of it where having this change in the way that our brains are working with detecting danger, especially with things like perception. Like this topic is kind of a really abstract topic nowadays because it's so deep and there's so much about our perception that's evolving that it's really hard to kind of take a moment in time of it and paint a really good picture of perception without acknowledging all the changes that have been made in just a couple hundred years, and then let alone the next couple hundred years. It's a tough one, I feel like I had a tough time with this topic. That's just me. But that's the reason is it is abstract and it's something where it's an automated feature of our brain.
Right.
And to take control of that is damn near impossible.
Yeah. It's even more than a human instinct.
Yeah.
It's more of like it's the wiring that made the instincts possible.
Yeah.
It's already there. It's the foundation that automatically occurs. So, I mean, like I said at the beginning, so many people have different perspectives on all sorts of things. So I think that it's a great topic to even just introduce in our like library of episodes that I'm sure we can talk about later on as well, because it's such a big topic. And just hitting the top of the iceberg is good enough for people to understand that, respect the now, be more present so then you can see when you get the triggers, to see when you are just immediately going on to, oh, it's just a bad thing or it's a good thing. Like be aware of your thought processes because it's very easy to manipulate people's thoughts nowadays.
I mean, that's a great point, but I do feel like being manipulated has always been a super easy thing to do as far as like the human race goes, right? Because we have so many different examples of it. And a lot of it comes into where the start of the grunt work is always overlooked on things, right? Like we talk about with social media and why it can be so toxic, because we think success is what we see. And success is everything before what we see.
Yeah, it's what built up to it.
And the manipulation works the same way, because what does it take for, say, like a new religion to form and people want to call it a cult when you have, they call you crazy and then you have 10 to 100 people following you, and then you go from being crazy to being a cult, and then you go from 100 people following you to 10,000 people following you, and now you're just some obscure religion, and then you go from 10,000 people to having 1 million people follow you, and now you're a decent religion.
Yeah.
that type of manipulation. You know
what I'm saying, the danger that comes into that nowadays is that there's so many people that understand how people's minds work, whereas the day-to-day person, the one that's trying to better themselves, the ones that are listening, probably aren't aware that their perception is being attacked.
Yeah.
Because these people that are like social media, the media itself, the news, the everything, they understand that if they're broad and generic in their strokes of attack, like they can feed a million people at once to go, this is what the story is, or this is what the media is, this is what success is, or this is how easy you can lose success, things like that. So if you're not aware of that going into it, you're going to be more susceptible to being manipulated.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, is the danger in not being aware or not acknowledging your perception is different than somebody else's perception.
Especially for a lot of reasons why, the main media spends so much time focusing on dangerous things and sad stories, bad people, all that, instead of the better side, the brighter side of life. They want to focus on the little trivial issues and, sometimes even the things that, personally, I say they don't matter. I don't need to know who died today.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody in my community 10 miles away I've never heard of died today. They're going to put on the news just to make people sad.
Disclaimer, he's not saying that dying is a good thing. He's not saying that he doesn't care if people die. He's saying that these kind of negative feeds don't need to be put into the society. Like, we don't need to know this.
Yeah, it's not
what
their
good
place.
Is that going to do?
Right, because as a human being, people die every day. People die every second. It's what it is. That's the discourse of humanity. So to feed off of that and to kind of point that out, like, hey, these people are dying, and it's just like, cool, that's what humans do. We die, And again, back to the perception of it, they want to feed into these types of things because we do lack that, like you're saying, that dangerous side, the chaos side of things. So even just going back to pointing out the obvious sometimes can really kind of ignite those sparks in the back of your brain, and get you more motivated to see what's going on in a negative light with that media programming, with the social media, with whoever is trying to influence you.
Yeah. And it's something that you can't even change. You can't physically affect that. So why do you need it?
Right.
So anyway, I think it was a great episode.
Well, I'm glad you think so, and I hope the viewers do too. My last piece of advice when it comes to dealing with perception, dealing with these triggers and starting to recognize these things, realizing the automatic lies that are fed into your brain, is just a couple simple things. Take these challenges in your life a little slower. The more you rush through it, the more your perception fills in the blanks, the more automatic lies you're feeding to yourself. So take it slower, take a methodical approach with it, think with intention on these things, and just learn to focus deeply. Focus deeply on your goals. Don't let your brain fill in all that empty space. Put thought, put effort into it. If it's about you, make it about you. Get after it and become the person who you want to be.
Take your perspective into account when you go ahead and like and subscribe to the videos. You can go ahead and share these videos and our full catalog that we have on our profile to all your friends and family, or those that you think could benefit the most from what we say in each topic and each episode. Go ahead and you can follow us on social media if you want to. You can reach out to us, DMs or comments on our posts. Those links are down below. We have a Facebook and an Instagram. Remember, we're also on Anchor FM, so that means that we're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, most places where you get your podcast, audio form only. The video would only be on YouTube for the time being. And remember, all of our videos come out Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 a.m. EST. And until next time,
go on and get